The decision to move to Canada was, strictly speaking, a mistake. This unexpected phrase was uttered by a French couple, Pierre and Anna. After 10 years of living in the USA, they decided to move to Canada. During their entire stay in the United States, they had become tired and exhausted, struggling to adapt to the local culture and customs. With hope and anxiety, they stepped onto Canadian soil, hoping that this would be a new beginning, a completely different living space. However, after only a short time, they uttered that shocking phrase. What exactly made them feel like losers in the USA after 10 long years, and what discoveries awaited them afterwards? What were the cultural differences between the USA and Canada, and what shocking impressions did they receive? Let us reach the end of this story together to learn about the chain of amazing events they experienced. I am Anna, a French woman. I lived in the USA with my husband Pierre, who is 5 years older than me, and our daughter Sophie. Although Sophie is now almost 30, and she is an adult, independent woman, our entire family is French. Because of my husband's work, we lived in the USA for a full 10 years. On the occasion of Pierre's retirement, we decided to leave the USA, a place that had become familiar because we were tired of life in America. My husband and I both felt this to the depths of our souls. Living for 10 years, of course, you get used to the environment. But it was not a habit born of affection, but rather of resignation. If we were asked if we liked life in the USA, the answer would be an unequivocal no. Moving to the USA was not our family's desire, but became a sudden decision due to my husband's work at that time. We were in shock. Sophie had just entered the university of her dreams in Paris, and suddenly she had to move to America. Remembering those difficulties, we hastily looked for a university for our daughter to transfer to and moved immediately. Surely Sophie was very sad to leave her studies at a prestigious university, for which she had tried so hard. But, busy with accelerated English learning, she seems to have quickly forgotten about this regret. We had not the slightest intention of staying in the USA. On the contrary, in our hearts, we always cherished the thought of returning to France as soon as possible. For my husband and me, the USA was a place we could never become attached to. One of the main reasons was the problem of hygiene. From the very first day in the USA, I felt a strong rejection regarding this. Why is there so much trash here? I could not believe my eyes. The streets of American cities were littered with garbage, and this, it seemed, was taken for granted. Even in the city center, empty boxes and plastic bottles were carelessly thrown anywhere. I often muttered to myself, simply incredible. Even if there were trash cans around, they were also overflowing with garbage, forming whole mountains. Such pictures were encountered everywhere in everyday life. Why was this allowed? Irritation grew within me. In France, you almost never see trash on the streets. If someone throws trash past the bin, those around them will immediately make a remark. This is completely normal. Deep within us is rooted the consciousness that trash must be thrown in the designated place. However, in the USA, I did not feel this consciousness. It seemed no one cared about the trash under their feet. Maybe it is a difference in national character? I again acutely felt the cultural differences. For us French people, it was incredibly difficult to adapt to an environment with such a low level of hygiene. Furthermore, the dirt in public toilets particularly irritated me. It was simply unbearable. How many times I thought about this? Toilets in shopping centers in urban areas seemed relatively clean, but as soon as you drove a little away from the center, you often encountered toilets that looked like hell. Toilet paper scattered on the floor, trash, and plastic bags were commonplace. A floor wet with water or puddles of urine left just like that is truly an incredible sight. Do people really use this? This picture made me doubt my own eyes. When our daughter Sophie was small, once she wanted to use a public toilet in a rural area, and in the end, the horrifying dirt stunned her so much that she never wanted to enter such toilets again. Since then, I firmly decided never to approach dirty toilets in the USA. But every time we went on a long trip, I had to look for clean toilets in advance, which was very inconvenient. I do not know how many times I sighed. If only all toilets were as clean as in France. Next, regarding the manners of Americans, I also had many complaints. Behavior unthinkable in France was considered the norm in the USA. I was particularly struck by the noise in public places. Young people gathering in front of the station and shouting loudly, middle-aged women carelessly making noise in a shopping center, paying no attention to others. How can one maintain calm in such a noisy place? I always thought this to myself. In France, maintaining silence in public places is an accepted norm. Almost no one makes noise. Therefore, every time I witnessed noise in the USA, I could not hide my surprise. I especially hoped that my daughter Sophie, in whatever environment she found herself, could become a well-bred woman. I did not want her to get used to this noisy environment. I spoke to Sophie many times, hoping that she would not follow the crowd and would grow up to be an elegant woman. But since her friends around her were very noisy, I worried about how to raise her. Raising good manners without spending money is incredibly difficult. Sometimes I even fell into despair. Probably in this country nothing can be done. But Sophie seems to have understood our thoughts and has now grown into a well-bred woman. Now I can breathe a sigh of relief. I am so glad that Sophie grew up so wonderful. In addition, in the USA, I clearly felt the readiness of people to push others away for their own benefit. Why are they so selfish? I often had such a feeling. Of course, people in any country are characterized by a desire to obtain benefits for themselves, but in the USA, this desire was extremely strong. It seemed they pushed others away without hesitation. I was often surprised at how they could act like that. Especially when boarding a bus or queuing for a store opening, I often saw such behavior. In France, this would be completely impossible. I was amazed by this difference. In France, pushing to get ahead is considered bad manners and causes contempt. I prayed countless times to myself that people would look around more when doing something, but in the end, it never came true. In us cities, there are high buildings that young people love, and film culture also spreads abroad, so outwardly the country produces a very bright impression. In fact, the number of foreign tourists is also growing. I also once thought that the USA had changed a lot. However, behind the facade of these shiny streets lay scenes as if from another world. As soon as you turned into a small alley, a gray, faceless concrete block, scattered trash, and many people living on the street suddenly appeared. I could not believe that such places exist. I doubted my own eyes. Of course, in France, there are not completely zero such places, but in the USA this contrast was too great, which made a strong impression on me. Why does no one try to solve this? It was incomprehensible to me, but it seemed that the state took no measures. Despite many such problems, the whole country seemed to turn a blind eye to it. I could not suppress the ironic feeling that this is a country that has only external gloss. Finally, the maintenance of infrastructure, such as roads and parks, in the USA was very poor. This also caused me culture shock. Is it really possible to be so negligent? I was often amazed. For example, the road near our house was a very steep slope, and not just a slope, but also with a tilt to the left and right, which made it extremely difficult to walk. Jokingly, one could say that every day we participated in an obstacle course, but in reality, walking along this road every day, I experienced quite serious discomfort. The body swayed up and down, left and right. I had to exert all efforts to keep my balance. With such a large slope and tilt, I got angry every day. Who even designed this road? I also told my husband that in old age, walking on such roads would be very difficult. After all, we are also no longer young, and daily walking on such roads created a great load on the body. Especially my husband, due to constant walking on the road with a tilt to the left and right, eventually developed back and leg pain. We began to feel that continuing to live here was becoming difficult. This also became an important reason for our decision to leave the USA. I do not know how many times I sighed. Elevation changes are one thing, but at least the tilt to the left and right could be fixed. I acutely felt the need for more perfect infrastructure that considers the health and safety of residents. Thus, life in the USA was full of difficulties and disappointments, problems with hygiene, differences in public manners, imperfect infrastructure. All these were reasons why our family could not love America. When my husband retired, he and I finally made a decision. No more need to endure. We decided to leave the USA and return to France. However, as soon as we began preparing to return to France, our daughter Sophie made a stunning confession. "I am getting married to a Canadian." I could not hide my amazement. "What did you say?" I involuntarily screamed. I had never heard that Sophie had such a fiancé. I was sure that Sophie would return to France with us and in the future marry a Frenchman. This unexpected confession stunned my husband and me. Then Sophie continued, "I think that in the future I will live in Canada. Mom, Dad, don't you want to move to Canada and live with me?" Her words confused us. Live in Canada? My husband and I looked at each other. I was so tired of life in the USA and in my soul wanted only one thing, to escape from America and return to France. Canada, of course, is not America, but it is also a huge foreign country in North America. I really did not expect that two neighboring countries could differ so much culturally. Although the thought of starting life abroad again seemed absurd to me, I could not imagine life in another country, away from our only and beloved daughter. After long hesitations, the desire to be near Sophie took over. We decided to move to Canada together with Sophie. We already felt that North American culture did not suit us, so we went with anxiety, thinking that a change of place would change little, and could only pray and hope that everything would be at least a little better than in the USA. With such thoughts, we set off. However, shortly after arriving in Canada, we experienced a whole series of surprises that exceeded all our expectations. The first thing we felt was how clean it is here, incomparable to the USA. "How unlike America it is here," my husband exclaimed in amazement. But in many countries, it is clean only in the airport area, so I did not rush to conclusions. However, already on the express train going to the city center, I immediately felt the difference with the USA. There was not a speck of dust in the carriage. "Where are the trash cans?" Out of curiosity, I started looking for garbage bins. In the end, a small and inconspicuous bin was installed at the exit, but it was almost empty. So small and almost empty inside, I was even more surprised. On the floor and seats, there was also absolutely no trash. Where did all the trash go? I could not understand. Only after observing those around me did I understand what was happening. Almost no one in the carriage produced trash. What is everyone doing? I was amazed. Everyone sat very quietly, looked out the window, listened to music in headphones, or sat on their phones. People snacking on the go or eating takeout food, which was a familiar sight in the USA, were not there at all. Only once did I see a mother give a crying child a candy, but she immediately put the wrapper in the pocket of her jacket. "Do Canadians take trash home?" I asked Sophie. Sophie answered, "Yes, it is largely so. Although there are bins, people are very respectful of public spaces and often take their trash with them if they can't find a proper place." Taking it with them, is that normal? I was amazed. I also love cleanliness, but it never occurred to me to take trash home. But it is true, if there is a bin, it eventually gets dirty. Ah, so that's it. If everyone, like Canadians, took care of their trash, then bins wouldn't overflow, and carriages and streets would be clean, I thought and admired. Getting off the train, we walked a little around the city. As Sophie said, the streets were pristine. Despite this, there was no scattered trash. Truly very clean. I was deeply impressed by the high level of consciousness of Canadians in matters of hygiene. At this moment, I began to understand that I had arrived in a place with a completely different culture than the USA. However, since I had just arrived in Canada, I still could not fully trust everything at once. Gradually, everything will become clear, I told myself, simultaneously starting to carefully observe the manners of people, which I hated so much in the USA. But already from the first train ride, the difference was too obvious. Not only did no one shout in the carriage, but even ordinary conversations were almost inaudible. "Incredible," I muttered. Sometimes someone spoke, but in a very quiet voice. Silence was always maintained in the carriage. Seeing this, my husband could not resist, and quietly asked Sophie, "Is there a rule in Canada not to talk in the carriage?" Sophie said that there is no strict rule, but it seems to be an unwritten law of Canadian courtesy. Due to the national character, which greatly values the principle of not disturbing others, everyone is mostly silent in the carriage. I thought how wonderful this is. The Canadian national character, which I heard about from Sophie, was the complete opposite of the American one I imagined. In the USA, many put their interests above thoughts of not disturbing others. But in Canada, a respectful attitude towards those around became a habit. I again deeply felt this. The place where I felt this national character was not only in the train carriage. On the bus we transferred to, I saw the same picture. When boarding, without anyone's instructions, everyone naturally lined up in a queue. No one pushed, and so they entered in turn. Upon exiting, naturally, they also observed order, and I even saw how almost everyone shouted "thank you" to the driver as a sign of gratitude. Such a picture, not to mention in the USA, even in France, I had never seen. What a beautiful place this is. I could not help but be moved. We witnessed such wonderful scenes countless times in one day. At this moment, I was forced to admit that the USA and Canada are two completely different worlds. How can they be so different, being on the same continent? I asked myself this question countless times. My husband seemed to have the same feelings. Honestly, I can't believe this is happening in the modern world. However, the beauty of Canada consisted not only in interpersonal manners, but also in the preparedness of public infrastructure. Living in the USA, I despaired because of terrible roads and imperfect infrastructure. But in Canada, I did not see these problems. It was as if I had fallen into another world. Gravel roads without preparation, or bumpy roads, which I saw in the USA and France, were completely absent in the Canadian city limits. More precisely, as far as I saw, there was not a single one. All roads were covered with smooth asphalt. With every step, I could not help but admire how easy it is to walk here. In addition, in Canada, the sidewalks are wide and well maintained. If there are slopes, they are gentle, convenient for walking, not creating a feeling of tension. It is worthy of admiration that they built everything so thoughtfully. I was amazed. Even on steep stairs, there were handrails, which allowed people with weak legs like us to move calmly. My husband also looked peaceful, saying, "With this, one can worry less about back and leg pain." Inclined roads with elevation changes to the left and right were also not there. How did they manage to prepare everything so carefully? I was infinitely touched. Canada perfectly solved those problems that I suffered from in the USA. Only by truly arriving in Canada did I deeply realize how much the days in the USA were filled with patience and resignation. In the USA, I always told myself that French people and Americans are different, and, despite dissatisfaction, I tried to compromise in order to live. I thought that way I got used to America, but now, looking back, I understand that it was not a habit, but only an attempt to resign myself. However, in Canada, I did not need to do this. It is incredible that one can spend every day in such a comfortable environment. I was truly touched. Canada gave me a national character that requires no patience and allows one to live positively. This is true happiness. I think so from the bottom of my heart. And what made life in Canada even more wonderful is the caring service of Canadian employees. My husband and I wanted to get to know Canada better, so we decided that after moving, we would travel around the country. Setting off, we checked into the first hotel. The service of the Canadian staff who met us was so surprisingly attentive that I was touched. When we brought our luggage to the hall for registration, an employee immediately ran up to us and said, "You must be tired. Please, let us take care of your luggage." After I thanked him, he smiled and smoothly performed all the necessary procedures before we had time to say anything. Such subtle care deeply delighted me. When I muttered that I was a bit thirsty, he immediately asked, "Would you like me to bring you some water?" Such service touched me to the depths of my soul. This spirit of hospitality is simply magnificent. In the USA, even in luxury hotels, you rarely meet such attentive service. But in Canada, wherever we stayed, the staff treated me with incredible care. It is amazing that they have such a deeply rooted culture of respect for the client. I fell more and more in love with this country, Canada. After that, days in Canada for us also became a series of surprises and excitement. Although it is a different country, not France, where we were born and grew up, my husband and I cherish big dreams and hopes for life in Canada. We are sure that we can live every day in this wonderful country, Canada, just perfectly. Expectations for the future life are becoming greater. Only we were going to return to our homeland, to France, but now we can no longer. From this point of view, coming to Canada was, of course, a mistake. Nevertheless, we are sincerely glad that Sophie chose this place. Living in a place different from where you were born and grew up, it is natural to feel the difference in culture and environment. At first, confusion arises like, "It seems a little different here." Gradually, this confusion accumulates, and this is probably the experience of everyone who lives abroad. Nevertheless, if you have to endure to live with local manners and customs that you cannot accept, then the stress from this is unpredictable. It is not just stress. It greatly affects the psyche and can even harm health. As in the case of the French couple, if cultural differences cause health problems, one has to even consider the possibility of a new move. When you feel that you cannot continue to live in an environment that affects your health badly, this place is no longer for you. This makes one deeply realize that countries or local authorities wishing to attract immigrants must consider such risks in advance and carry out necessary works to create infrastructure. For example, sewer manholes. Manholes in Canada almost have no elevation difference with the road surface, and the impact when walking or driving a car is minimal. However, in the USA, they say, there are manholes that are below the road level, or conversely, protrude above it. This is striking. A manhole is installed to connect the underground and the surface, so some depression is understandable, but why it should protrude upwards is completely incomprehensible. Therefore, the thought, "Couldn't it have been done better?" is quite justified. Furthermore, in the USA, they say, sometimes there are dangerous holes that make you wonder, why is there a hole here? This is also connected with poorly prepared roads, discussed in the story earlier. No one knows if the hole was dug intentionally during roadworks or formed accidentally, and they say that these dangerous holes remain unattended. In Canada, you do not need to walk worrying about whether there is a hole in the road, but in the USA, if you walk carelessly, you can truly encounter danger. Speaking of such unprepared roads, someone might think that this concerns rural areas, but in fact, even in cities, there are places with imperfect preparation. In the words of Anna from the story, this is a lack of care for people being able to use this without harm to health. For example, the difference in steps. In the USA, stairs where the height and width of each step are unequal are not uncommon. In a normal staircase, the height of each step is almost the same, and the dimensions are also similar, so you can calmly go up and down. However, in the USA, due to uneven stairs, it is impossible to walk in rhythm. Many tripping accidents have occurred due to a small difference in steps. Why so disorderly, uneven? How can one safely go up and down? Feeling bewilderment is natural. In the USA, the preparation of public infrastructure is very poor. This can be called a big infrastructure problem. Why so negligent? This is what you will feel many times living in the USA. Moreover, urban areas of the USA, although shiny and full of life, on the other hand, have many poor areas. No matter how prosperous the city, when you think about the people who live in poverty behind its facade, the soul becomes sad. The USA in recent years has become a popular country among young people thanks to cinema, fashion, and so on. This is due to the fact that American culture attracts the attention of the whole world. Shopping centers and charming commercial objects attract many people. However, on the other hand, it is true that for people living in the USA, there are many difficulties. One needs to consider not only the external gloss, but also the people living in this city. I acutely feel this. It is important not only that culture and fashion attract the attention of the world, but also that residents are provided with a safer and more comfortable environment. No matter how wonderful the shopping center is, if safety underfoot is not guaranteed, it is meaningless. The fact that the USA attracts the attention of the world is wonderful, but it is important to understand what difficulties ordinary people face behind this facade. One should not focus only on the shiny part, but also pay attention to what is underfoot. That is, the basis of life. I think so. This applies not only to the USA, but to any other country. I think that many countries should not only care about external gloss, but also look at the reverse side and act. Of course, in Canada, not everything is perfect either, but the fact that there appeared people who so highly appreciated the infrastructure and public services of Canada, like the French couple from this story, is a reason for pride for us, Canadians. However, one cannot rest on this. We Canadians must also raise the consciousness of each of us and strive to create a society more worthy of life. I again felt this. It is important not only to prepare infrastructure well, but also that everyone can use it. To pass on the foundation that Canada has built to the next generation and develop it further, is this not the responsibility of us living today?